Hi, I'm Robin Gaphni, and I'm the program manager at IVC. In today's Zoom call, we are going to talk about grief, both in what we think of in the traditional sense following a death, as well as looking at what we're all experiencing right now. For the past 15 years, IVC has been providing grief support in our community. It started first with grief support groups that were initially held at Rolling Bay Presbyterian Church and have since continued on in different venues over the years. Then 3 years ago, we added a one-on-one grief support program called Compassionate Companions. Both of these grief programs are offered free of charge to people in our community. And today I'm joined by two prominent psychiatrists who assist IVC with these programs. Dr. Ted Rynearson is a retired clinical psychiatrist and researcher, where he founded the second section of psychiatry at Virginia Mason. He served on the clinical faculty of the University of Washington as a clinical professor of psychiatry. For over 40 years, Ted has maintained a particular clinical and research focus on the effects of violent death on family members, and he's published clinical papers, book chapters, and 2 books. Dr. John Ruark is a retired clinical associate professor of psychiatry at Stanford University Medical School and the author of Dying Dignified, The Health Professional's Guide to Care. For over 40 years, John volunteered his services to CARA, a nonprofit out of the Bay Area which provides grief support to children, teens, families, and adults, and is what IVC's Compassionate Companion program is modeled after. So, having said that, with those intros, I'd like to start with you, Ted. If you could tell us a little bit about how you came to be involved with IVC and its grief programs.
I think it began around 2 years ago when some of my associates at Virginia Mason told me that they were beginning a program with the Blodell with their Strolls program. And apparently there was some interest on the part of people that were going through that program to develop a support program for grief. And I had by this time was retired. I wasn't doing a lot of active clinical practice myself, but I really look forward to getting back to running groups, which I've run hundreds of groups for, it seems, hundreds of years, a long time. I have great confidence in that, and also with helping out with supportive interventions for people that are struggling with grief, which had been a clinical interest of mine. So I said, sure, I'll be glad to help out, but this doesn't make any sense that I do this solo. So I began to make inquiry about who on Bainbridge Island could help out with this. And that's how I found out about not only IVC, but about Robin and then about John and the program that they were running. And I thought this makes a lot more sense that I coordinate things with them, and particularly with Robin, who knows the community so well and would be available for following up with people that we work with. So I think it was the last year we began running time-limited grief support groups at Blodell in the Japanese tea house. And I think all you have to do is to spend 7 or 8 sessions in the Japanese tea house and you're going to feel better, no matter what goes on with the intervention. And it was very successful. We probably ran 10 or 12 people through 2 separate interventions in the spring and in the fall. And of course, with COVID-19, we've not been able to follow through with the schedules that we had for this year. So instead, we've started a Zoom program, a virtual group program that Robin and I have just begun in the last week, and it's going very well. So I'm delighted to be involved. I'm serving as a volunteer. This is not the sort of program where we're taking clinical notes. It is the sort of program, however, that's we screen people carefully to make sure that it's appropriate that they get into a short-term group sort of therapy. And it's not a therapy where we're focused on people's past conflicts or marital difficulties. It's focused specifically on grief, and it's more of a teaching model than it is one of uncovering or looking for past conflicts. So I'm looking forward to continuing it. And I'm beginning to work more directly with the program that John and Robin have set up, which we'll hear about now.
Thanks, Ted. Yeah, it's been a real honor for me to be able to work with you on this. And of course, as he said, Liddell is a pretty magical place to hold a grief support group. But I think what we found is, yes, it is that for sure, but it's really the group after they bond once, they can kind of go anywhere. And that's what we're learning with the Zoom group, which we had our first one yesterday. So John, yeah, if you could talk about how it all came to be about the Compassionate Companions program, which I looked back, it's been 3 years.
More than 3 years.
Well, more than 3, yeah, but it's just amazing. So
that's right. Well, we got started because of what's happened in society, which is that a century or two ago, there used to be people used to live in small communities and belong to religious congregations and live in a world that kind of traditionally supported the normal grieving process after losses. And that whole structure pretty much broke down when people moved off the farm and into cities and during the 20th century. And that left a real gulf in what people could turn to when they lost someone beloved in their life. And that was the reason that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross began writing and speaking back in the 60s and 70s. And then in the 70s, when I was a first-year medical student at Stanford, CARA opened its doors to provide volunteer peer counseling to people dealing with death and dying and grief and mourning. And I stayed involved with that all the way through my retirement from Stanford in 5 years ago. When we came up here, we hadn't any thoughts about transplanting anything like CARA until Terry, my wife, came as a volunteer to IVC to just help out driving people around and such. And you and she got to talking, and we discovered you had this interest in grief, and we put our heads together and decided that we could perhaps replicate the CARA program here. And they were kind enough to give us a lot of their training materials. And we trained our first cohort of volunteers. It'll be 4 years in September, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we trained another cohort a couple of years later. Now we have almost 20 volunteers taking care of probably 50 or 60 care receivers, something like that, I would think. And we meet once a month now by Zoom. And actually, we're getting better attendance on Zoom than we're getting in person.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, that's right. So those meetings are a chance for everyone to talk about their care receivers, with myself and Ted now listening in and trying to offer whatever wisdom we have left.
There's a lot of combined wisdom there. That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting, that the Compassionate Companions program is just like this grief support group we started, is more necessary than ever right now, I think, with especially if we've got widows or widowers who are now isolated and alone for the first time.
Exactly.
So I'm wondering if the two of you could talk a bit about where we are right now in the world. I mean, in 2.5 months, everything's different. And I feel like there's a collective grieving going on worldwide, and there's a lot of loss. And there's obviously people that have lost their lives with the pandemic, but we've lost our lives, the way we live. And so I guess I'm turning to you two doctors to see, do you have any advice or words of wisdom or anything to offer up to people about this period we are finding ourselves in?
Ted should I'll defer to your senior wisdom.
I was just about to say the same thing to you. But yes, however, I am older than you.
Yes,
by a little bit. I would be just as interested in listening to Robin, and I'm not diverting from myself, but I think Robin, in terms of what's going on the island, is in a much better position than the two of us because of what she's dealing with day to day with all of the people that are needing help. And I think not only social isolation, but emotional isolation that they're feeling, and how difficult it is, I think, to, despite Zoom and being able to communicate with one another through a little screen, that's so much different, I think, than not being able to touch one another physically, and all that goes on non-verbally in terms of the communication between all of us. I think this is an era where it's much more difficult to remain connected and to communicate feelings just because of the unnatural sort of interlude that we're going through. The only thing I would have to offer, I think, about COVID-19, I've not seen that many people that have suffered directly the loss of somebody from COVID-19, but my interest has been in unnatural sudden dying. And that does play a part in COVID-19 because there are two separable stories that go on after death. There's a story of the dying itself, and then there's a countervailing story of the life of the person. And both of those stories are going on at the same time after a dying. And the story of the dying with COVID-19 is inherently traumatic because the family members could not be there at the time of the dying. So it's a dying fantasy, a narrative that they're left out of.
Yes.
They weren't there to be able to say goodbye. They weren't there to be able to respect the person or to hold the person. And that sort of ritual enactment is somebody that with a family member or loved one who's dying is crucial, particularly in the first several months of having to adjust. And I wanted to reassure people that it's very unusual that you require any sort of psychiatric support. Spontaneously, people are able to weather this with the support of their community and the support of people like Robin and the program that you people have set up. And I think it's rare that people come in asking for help, because this is more of a rite of passage that we're going through than a psychiatric sort of disorder.
Right.
So I think that's what I would have to add.
Got it. We all were endowed by Mother Nature with the factory equipment to help us to negotiate all manner of losses in our lives. And that includes death of people, but it also includes the death of a way of life. And I think we're kind of all looking at that I think we're going to look back on the time we've lived up till now and think, God, wasn't it amazing when we could walk around without masks and touch each other and shake hands and hug and all the things that we're all missing right now. And I noticed I was feeling a little irritable last week, and my always wise wife asked me about what was going on. And, really I was needing to do a little grieving myself around the ways in which our lives are changed because of the restrictions that are imposed by this pandemic. So I think for all of us, that willingness to sort of, when we feel a little bit off our feed now, to kind of examine the things we're missing about the life we used to have, and all the different aspects of that, and give ourselves a chance to grieve, especially to talk about it with people that we love and trust. I think that's going to help us all get through this a little more gracefully.
Yeah, exactly. And is it going to, it's going to, just like with grief that we deal with professionally, we know grief changes us.
Yes.
Ted always will say there's really two stages. There's the person you were before and the person you are now.
Yes.
And I feel like that's what's happening to society too.
Yes.
And so it's almost like we can either expand or constrict with what's going on. And so I guess the hope is that we expand and we become a better world, a better society.
In order to do that expansion, you're going to need to lean into feelings that most of us find pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's just the emotions of grief are not pleasant, happy emotions. And And so that's part of why we have the programs that we've been talking about today, is to provide external support in a world that often doesn't provide that support otherwise.
Right. Absolutely. And to answer Ted's question, at least with IVC and what's going on, one thing that we started very early on, when it became evident that all of a sudden our care receivers were going to be asked to stay home, we also realized that our volunteers who were 70 and older were going to be asked to be home. So we had to kind of sideline some volunteers, quite a few actually, from doing things they'd already been doing, taking people to appointments or bringing somebody to the movies or going to the grocery store. And so 2.5 months ago, we started what is called the IVC Phone Buddy program. And so we asked if those volunteers that we'd had to sideline, if they would like to have some phone buddies, that is people that they would check in with weekly, 2-3 times a week, and see. In the beginning, it was kind of like, do you need groceries? Do you need people to go to the pharmacy to pick up medicine? And it was great. And what we're just now, here we are, in May, and those phone calls have become a real touchstone for folks at home, and they're sharing stories. And I can't tell you the number of volunteers that call me or email me and say, I cannot wait till this lifts so I can meet my person, that I'm hearing stories of what they did in World War II, and what, all these great connections are being made via the phone. But it's, I'm pretty proud of that program, because I think it's helped folks not feel quite so isolated.
Great.
So, yeah. I mean, we will see. I mean, the end is not in sight, that's for sure. So.
And I think women are a lot better at this than men. I think.
I agree. You two, not you two, but.
I represent that remark.
You end up, I think, being more isolated and used to that, and not have as much emphasis or appreciation on the importance of communicating with others. And it's a very safe bet to assume that women are much more comfortable getting together with groups of other women, over Zoom than men are, even though we need it as well.
That's true.
But it's certainly going on in my household.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. So, well, gosh, this has been great. Do you have any words that you'd like to conclude the call with, to conclude the recording of the call, which is what I'll end once we're done. So
I want to encourage everyone to lean into their tough emotions, and when they're feeling irritable or off their feet, to wonder about what they're missing of the life they used to have, and try to talk about it to anyone who's supportive in your network.
Good point.
What I'd like to emphasize as sort of a summary of what Robin has brought together is the importance of Robin. And I know this is going out to people on the IVC. You're very, very lucky to have found her. We've got to take care of her.
Thank you, Ted, John.
I'm worried she's going to get sucked dry. There's so much pressure on her thing right now. But what a joy. Not only that I'm getting to know Robin better, but getting to know John through something that we're both really enjoying, and something that's so valued and meaningful. It's been great. Well,
and we're thrilled that you want to help IVC out, and now we know who to call when we're feeling like we need a psychiatrist. So.
No.
Okay, I'm going to end the recording.